Welcome, Angela, and welcome to everyone that has joined us this evening. Thanks for coming. I guess it's always awkward. I'm still not used to this talking to yourself thing, but I assume you can all hear me. And there's probably, I think, half the names on the list I recognise to some extent, and half I didn't. So if we haven't met, hello, my name's Sam. I'm lucky enough to be working for Quorum Sense, and I've been involved with them for a bit over a year now. And over the last few months we've been sort of planning the year and hoping to kick it into gear, and COVID's changed things a bit in terms of what we can do in the field. But so webinars is our interim solution for now, and I think it might be something that actually lasts, because it's a pretty cool way to connect across the country. We've been running a couple of trial webinars just with some sort of closer farmer groups, just to get the feel of it. And this is our first one that's gone a bit wider out to that Facebook group. So looking forward to having Angela here in the conversation tonight. So Andrew and I met at we'll call it a young science influencers thing a couple of years ago. And we've been pretty good friends ever since. We've spent quite a lot of time at her place where my partner and I were travelling around. Angela lives in Waipara, and that beautiful background that she's got behind her there is actually a photo from their place, probably in November or something, looking its best.
Me?
And so Angela, they have a 10-acre property in Waipara there called the Food Farm. They've been producing and selling food there for a number of years, and they also run a whole lot of cool education workshops, which are getting extremely popular at the moment. And Angela's also the chief executive of Eat New Zealand, which I'll let her explain a little bit more about, and also a wine marketer. And I don't know if you've got a glass in your hand tonight, Ange.
I haven't. I was too nervous. Wine-free Monday seemed like a good idea.
One day a week.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Cool. And so one of Ange and I's favourite topics is about farmers connecting with their local food systems. And so rather than keeping that convo to ourselves, we thought we'd expand it a bit wider. And it's really cool to see some farmers that I've talked to in the past about this kind of idea. Just seems to come up in a lot of conversations. A lot of things that farmers would like to do is particularly that selling local thing to their communities, but also broader than that. And we've actually got quite a few farmers and growers on board who have been doing it from anywhere from a couple of years to quite a few. So there's a lot of experience listening in, and hopefully we might get the opportunity to hear from a couple of you towards the end. And we've got a pretty massive topic that we picked for this evening. We could go pretty wide with it if we wanted to, but we've been bouncing around a couple of ideas that we thought might be of particular interest. But perhaps as a start, let's just hear a bit more about yourself and your background.
Sure. Kia ora, Sam. Kia ora koutou. Just wanted to preface this conversation by acknowledging the interesting times in which we find ourselves, in which we find this conversation. I've been listening to this amazing podcast, which I highly recommend. It's called The Great Humbling, written or broadcasted by one of the guys that wrote Dark Mountain. And it's really informed my thinking over the last few weeks. They have this ability to be incredibly insightful despite the chaotic times in which we find ourselves. And I love this quote I heard today, which is, nothing happens for decades, then decades happen in weeks. And pretty much that's what it feels like at the moment. Every day is a week, and every week is a decade. And we find ourselves in this incredible lava landscape, sort of this unformed space that's still molten. And it's really difficult to know where the solid ground is. And I think it's really important to remember that as we talk about this, because as a species, we're not very good at sitting in this quite chaotic, painful, space. We really want to rush to the other side and make sense of all of this. But I don't actually think that's our job right now. I think our job is actually to be brave enough to sit in the space of chaos and understand that the end of the story is still to come. And it's not until the end of the story comes that we'll be able to make sense of any of this. So I'm saying that now because I think it's really important. If you're going to ask someone to predict where things are going or what might happen in the future, the answer is, who knows? None of us know. And anybody that pretends they do is just that, they're pretending. So, yeah, I think that's really important to say right now. And really, I love this quote too, which is that times are urgent, slow down. So I think that's really important to remember, that we're not going to get to a point of conclusion that we can all rush off and create something meaningful as a result of this. But it's a really amazing time and an amazing opportunity to have these conversations, because, wow, how much is our landscape changing, and how much is everything we thought to be pretty rock solid being moved significantly. So a little bit about my background. I am as Sam pointed out, trained as a winemaker, but spent my career, my training and trade in wine business and wine marketing in Australia. Set up the Barossa Farmers Market as well, had this massive love for food, and the Barossa was an incredible place to be in terms of a food and wine community. Then moved back here about 15 years ago with my infant daughter and my husband, and we set up the food farm, which, is Sam mentioned, is a 16-hectare permaculture property. We grow all of our own food, and we help other people to learn how to grow their food. We have variously had a community-supported agriculture scheme and sold at markets, but for the moment, because of my work with Eat New Zealand, we're really just feeding ourselves and teaching other people how to grow food. Eat New Zealand is a collective of some of the country's best chefs, food writers, tourism operators, event organisers, producers, thinkers, eaters. It's quite a loose collective that sits right across our food system, which is what makes it really unique, because what we discovered is that our food system in New Zealand and around the world, generally speaking, is really siloed. So agriculture sits in its silo, agribusiness, hospitality and tourism. But Eat New Zealand is supported by New Zealand Beef and Lamb and ANZ Bank. Our strategic partner is the Restaurant Association, and we've won the Auckland Airport Tourism Investment Fund 2 years in a row to kind of forward this conversation around our food story and the connection to how we see ourselves as a people. It's been a big few weeks for Eat New Zealand. We have seen food experience literally disappear. Tourism and hospitality have fallen into a chasm. And as an organisation, we've had to walk around the very precipice of that, understanding who and what the landscape is as it changes. But fortunately, our vision has always been to connect people to our land through food. And that's never been more important than it is right now. So we find ourselves in a really interesting position in terms of understanding the landscape as it sits right now, and trying to see the opportunities for where we might move forward, and also the massive challenges that are coming at us as well. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Awesome, thank you. I think I said your place was 10 acres and it's 16 hectares, which is only wrong by a small margin. Sorry about that, I should know it better. So there was a whole lot of, well, one thing I'm not sure that you mentioned was the New Zealand Food Hui.
Yeah.
If I've got the name correct, which has been running for 2 years now, is that right?
5 years actually, yeah.
There we go. I've known you for 2, so I've known about it for 2. And that's you're a pretty amazing collaborator, as with that list of partners that you rolled off before. You've got an amazing ability to bring people together, and that event certainly seems to be increasingly known as one of the sort of must attend events for people in the food that are interested in the food system and where that's heading. And you've done an amazing job of continuing to bring that together. And I was just thinking, the sort of pre-COVID, there's a lot of talk about trends and where things are heading in terms of like the international landscape with consumers as well as domestic production systems. And there's always that, kind of value add versus volume conversation, which is running for a number of years. I imagine that some of those themes still hold true and some of them may have shifted. So I wonder if we want to like sort of talk about those that you feel are going to be consistent and that we can sort of have confidence in, and then some of the ones which are sort of more up in the air and uncertain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if we start at the other end, so if we start with tourism, obviously international tourism for all intents and purposes is gone for the time being. But interestingly, where there's a really big opportunity, I think, sits around aspirational travellers and people that will seek out that sort of virtual food experience that will be based in New Zealand. So I think even though we've lost the actual travellers, the international travellers, if we can build something that's relevant to them, they can find a way to be here without being here. So that's both the challenge and the opportunity in that one. Obviously, regional tourism will come back to some extent, and I actually see a huge opportunity that sits around agricultural agritourism as a opportunity for regional tourism, just because often that's a way for Kiwis to get to know their own place. It's quite an authentic, grounded experience that Kiwis are prepared to look for. That it means that there isn't a whole lot of sort of wholesalers in the value chain that are sending them directly to Rotorua or to Queenstown to bungee jump or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like they're actually going to find their own way, and that's going to be much more individual and much more connected. And I think that agriculture has a huge opportunity in that space. So that's kind of tourism. Hospitality. Yeah, hospitality's super tough, and it's been by far the biggest heartbreak in terms of the last 6 weeks, just watching that disintegrate. Just so many friends and colleagues who sit in that space, and it's there has been no food service, so we've seen a massive shift in our food system away, trying to pivot from food service to supermarkets, which just is impossible mostly in that time. And we've seen the loss of tens of millions of dollars of New Zealand food and food waste, which is heartbreaking. But also for those businesses, those hospitality businesses, it's incredibly tough. We move from level 4 where they can't operate at all to level 3 where they can have takeaways. But most of our hospitality businesses really aren't designed for that, particularly ones that use our product. So they're absolute lava landscape stuff. They have no idea whether or not they're going to survive. And the problem is that, the antithesis of social isolation is hospitality. And as long as we have some level of social isolation, it takes away from hospitality. And the problem is internationally, we can't see a solution either. There's no country that's been in it or been through it for long enough to see a rebuild. And even in places like Wuhan, where things are open again, there's nobody in restaurants because there's a massive gap between the being allowed to go somewhere and wanting to go somewhere. And I know that we'll see that in New Zealand. There'll be this lag between being told that you're allowed to go to a restaurant and actually wanting to go to a restaurant. So there's a huge amount still to fall out of that situation as it sits. And of course, those businesses are reopening at a time where what they do might be seen as discretionary and spend of discretionary income, and lots of people have less of that. So really challenging in that space. Agribusiness, really interesting to see their conversations around the current situation. I can see a lot of discussion about the primary sector leading us into recovery, which I think is legit, particularly because tourism definitely won't. I can see huge opportunities for us around being a COVID-free country. Internationally, we have really high trust around food safety, and to be a country that has managed to eradicate a virus, if that's where we end up, then the opportunity for us, for our food products overseas, are incredible. But at the same time, some of the rules of the game would have changed as a result of that, and things like provenance will be incredibly important. And also the sense of functional foods or wellness, and how important that will become, I think, will be really interesting compared to what it was previously. But also I had this idea, we have a massive thing coming, and some of the figures that I've been told is somewhere between 750,000 and 1.2 million New Zealanders who are going to be food insecure in the coming months, which is mind-blowing stuff. And we're already starting to see that through food banks, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So what is that, and how do we respond to that as a food system, and how do we create more food resilience, more food access, get rid of food poverty? How do we connect all of that together? And is there an opportunity, if we can work together as a network, across the network, to solve that problem, that can then be connected to this brand that we're creating internationally that sits around kindness? So feeding our people reflects who we want to be seen as internationally. So that for me is a huge opportunity. Yeah, so that's kind of my look across the food system at the moment. That may well change next week, but that's how I see it at the moment. Yeah.
Sure, thanks. The just that last point that you made about I remember sometime, I think it was last year, Ian Proudfoot from KPMG, who we've talked about a little bit prior to this, talking about his thoughts, seeing the kind of relatively poor health and obesity rates of New Zealand, as it contrasted with a country that's trying to export a premium, highly nutritious product, in the kind of the clash effectively between those things, similar in some ways to the clean green debate with the water quality thing debate going on at the same time. So
oh yeah, massive. And turns out that the second most significant comorbidity for COVID-19 is obesity. And at midnight tonight, I saw on a school page today about a family that are going to start lining up for McDonald's at 3 a.m. in the drive-through. And from tomorrow, we're going to have lines. What is it? Level 3 is level 4 with KFC. So, yeah, it's going to be pretty hard to watch that, to be honest.
So one of the the common principles, I guess, common threads that come up a lot in the Quorum Sense Facebook group or other conversations is this topic about diversity. And often a bunch of farmers that's talking about diverse plants, diverse crops, diverse microbes in the soil and on those crops, perhaps diversity of crop rotation, perhaps to an extent diversity of production, people stacking hens and things onto their existing pastoral systems, as an example. What does diversity look like for the farmers that are here tonight, as far as like engaging with our local food system? Like, what's your kind of you've done a lot of learning, no doubt, in your own experience and those of your friends, in terms of sort of accessing those local markets. You've just articulated this opportunity, which is food insecure New Zealanders, and what we probably haven't talked about, but what has been in the media, is insecure global food supply chains, and that kind of stuff. And there's already quite a few pre-existing limitations of our food system before COVID, in terms of access to healthy food year round. So yeah, what does diversity at a farm business look like, or what are the steps that are available to farmers that are looking to kind of meet this need that you've sort of articulated?
Yeah, I mean, our international food system is incredibly brittle, and we've traded efficiency for redundancy. So what that means is that when everything's going perfectly, we have this tight humming machine that spins within millimeters of its casing. But as soon as a single thing goes wrong, it has the capacity to just blow the whole cog apart. And that's exactly what's happened. So examples, one of my favorite is in the US, they have chicken processing lines or chains, and they only take size 12 chickens because of the way that the processing lines are automated. So even a delay of 5 to 7 days means that the chickens grow from size 12 to size 13, and then they can't process any of those chickens. So you can imagine what that is in a environment of massive volatility. You know, a plant that could be open 1 week, but then not open the next week, but then back open the next week. And farmers trying to manage that kind of chaos is just, you know, you just can't really. So we've built this really brittle food system, and it doesn't serve well this era we're walking into. And this isn't just about COVID-19. This is also about climate change. So you know, there's big thinking about there that this age is called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. And what that means is that super efficient systems don't actually match what it is that we need now. And so the alternative is a much more pliable, stretchable, manipulatable food system. And I think that comes from having much more diversity in our system. And so I guess diversity from a piece of land perspective looks like different crops in different places. But I guess the challenge that I want to put out there is that there's also, and that's kind of like a horizontal diversity, but it's also going to be super necessary to have a vertical diversity. And so by that, I mean that you have a number of markets that you might have the same product going into, or that you have a number of different products that are going into different markets. So, yeah, I mean, my theory around that is, you know, if every farm had 300 customers and one of those customers might be the local meat processor, and then another 10 might be your local community, and another 50 might be food transformation or food service, and then the rest are individual customers that you've found your way to connect yourself to, and that they see themselves as part of your farm. So that kind of level of diversity that we've never really needed before, because we were a colony, the motherland. We were the paddock in the ocean for the motherland, and so our job was really to ship commodity. And so because we did that, we were very poor at owning our own part of that and having our own self-identity around that. And that served an old system and an old model, and that doesn't serve what's coming next. Yeah.
So what is that? I don't know, pick an example of an industry. You know, we talk a lot about the arable sector, for example. We're favourite there, and Nigel Greenwood and I bounce ideas off all the time. There's a few other of the.
I hope you're listening, Nigel Greenwood.
Yeah, he threw a question in before, so I know he's there. And thanks for those questions that are coming in, and keep them flowing. I think maybe in 10 minutes or so we'll get stuck into them. Yeah. So what's your vision for the local arable sector in Christchurch?
Yeah, perfect example. The sector that we have the least food security around in New Zealand that I can see is our arable industry. For a whole lot of reasons, we feed most of our grain to our animals, and for various periods in the last couple of years, grain prices for animal feed have been higher than milling wheat for us to eat, which makes me laugh every time I say it. So, but also we source something like 91 to 93% of our milling grains from overseas. We import them, and it's almost impossible to have a New Zealand wheat loaf beyond that sort of specialty sourdough space, and particularly in the North Island. And there's all sorts of infrastructure issues. A major one, which is getting the grain from the South Island across to the North Island. So we've created this ridiculous insecurity in this space. And obviously just land use, you get so much less from producing arable crops than you do pasture crops. And so we have traded that away. But the problem with trading that away is it actually makes up a significant part of our diet. And there's a huge amount of food security that sit around those basics. And that's peas, beans, pulses, grains, all sorts. I'm just trying to remember what the other example I was going to use was, but, you know, huge amount that's, you know, there's rice and, you know, anything that's a staple, anything that's a carbohydrate. And we tend to import that in this country. And I mean, there's so many reasons why we do. But the point is, if we really want to create some food security in this country, that's a sector that we really need to take a good hard look at. And I know that FAR and AFIC are addressing that, because I was part of that working group as well, to come up with 100% milled grains by 2025. But the reality is, in order for them to achieve that, there has to actually be a multi-sector support behind that idea. It can't just sit with the arable sector. So that's a real challenge. Canterbury, interestingly, has a huge opportunity because it actually has the remnants of an arable system that sit within it, even though we've mothballed heaps. Like, for example, Timaru used to be the capital of pasta in New Zealand. Who knew? But we do actually have mothballed the remnants of a really good system. And that's my challenge to the regenerative grain or arable farmers that might be listening, is that I just see a huge opportunity in owning a little bit more of that value chain, so that you can create quite a vertically integrated product that you can go potentially direct to consumer with, or just being able to produce flour to feed your local community.
So to get really practical with the question that Nigel just chucked in there, if he's trying to link his farm and his wheat for home, and for example, just wheat for home milling, so Nigel's actually got like one of those Kenwood machines with a mill that's attachment, so you can mill your own whole flour fresh, and it tastes different, but I like it.
Amazing. Yeah.
How does he go about that? Is it a social media thing? Is he building a Shopify website? Is it going to farmers markets? Who's he tapping into to help him reach those consumers? Because, you know, most farmers, you know, they're 95 to 99% farmer, and sometimes with curiosities for other things. So it's not a skill set necessarily that we've all got.
Yeah, I think you know, you could use Millmore Downs as an example. They're a biodynamic granary really close to where I am, and I've sort of followed their journey for a long time. And really, it's probably about getting the flour into the hands of some really key influencers. And despite the fact that hospitality's fallen over, actually baking and bakers have really experienced a renaissance. And so I think it's as simple as getting your flour in the hands of some of those really key bakers, them telling your story and being able to tell the story of where that comes from, which, by the way, they really want to do. They really want to do that. And then them using social media to connect back to you. In order to connect back to you, you have to be on social media and you have to be able to respond. And the platform, without a doubt, to do that on is Instagram. So Nigel, this means that you need to set up an Instagram account, and you need to think of a name for your whatever it is that you're going to produce, and then you need to give me a call and I will put you in touch with some bakers. They can mill. The milling bit isn't the hard stuff. A lot of them actually have mills, but they obviously need clean grain, so you're going to have to get it cleaned, and then you're going to have to think about the logistics of shipping as well. Farmers Mill have done this, but they actually ran into problems because they couldn't ship in small enough amounts. So it's just thinking about around the logistic and supply of that, and then finding, I don't know, maybe depending on how much grain you've got, 10 bakers across the country who'll support you, and then they'll go out to their customers and talk about what it is who you are, and then in turn those customers will come back and try and buy your product direct. So when they do that, you're going to have to be ready to be able to sell to them. Is that practical and specific enough?
Oh, that depends on whether Nigel gives you a call or not in the next week. That'll be the test. I think I'd expect a call. I suppose another probably a last question, which you're talking on there, is about.
I got a perfect from Nigel.
I don't know what you just got yourself into, Ange, but I hope you're ready for it. Storytelling. And this comes back a little bit to the topic of our conversation about this word regenerative, which means lots of different things to lots of different people. It's not super specific. It's kind of self-defined. Some of us would like to think it's really outcome focused in terms of the environment and ethics of production and the quality and safety of the product. Sometimes that costs money, but perhaps it's worth investing in. So what's the story that you think is that bakers or consumers are looking for? You know, there's a lot of organic grains out there already. Well, maybe not a lot, but they exist. We don't want to end up in a necessarily be competing with the organics grains, because they're actually doing a fantastic job, and that's all we eat at the moment. So where's our niche here?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I had quite a good discussion on the Quorum Sense page just yesterday around this, organics versus regenerative. And we have been farming organically here for 15 years. And when we started, we stepped into the BioGrow auditing system. What we found was that it didn't suit us as small growers because we couldn't justify how much the auditing system in terms of where our product was ending up. And I think that's key. Honestly, if your market is an international market that is going to demand some sort of certification, then I think it's really important to acknowledge that that's the way to go. And I'm sure eventually New Zealand will step into an international certified regenerative program. The thing is, I think in the short term, the whole conversation has the ability to be hijacked by definition of regenerative. And Sam, you and I've talked about this. What I love about regenerative and the regenerative space is how inclusive it is and how much it allows people to step into the journey to see whether it works for them or not. And I'd really hate for regenerative to lose that ability to welcome people as they become part of the journey. And like someone said, if it works, and if it works for you and it's doing well, then you end up leaving behind those stuff, the aspects of your agricultural system that aren't organic anyway, because you've got it right, and that makes sense. It's a natural system that you're creating here, so you don't need synthetic inputs. So I really like that about the regenerative space, and I'm really afraid nationally that there will be pressure from different areas around a drive for definition, and that's what I'd like to stay away from. So if you're going to continue to be inclusive the way that you have been, then you have to find another way to prove your worth that doesn't sit around an audited system. And my answer to that is to be really, really strong about telling your story. And it was funny because the person I was arguing with about this last night kept talking about pretty pictures, pictures like this one, I guess. And I find it really derogatory anyway, and a little bit sexist too, to be fair. So if you're listening. But the point being that that pretty pictures are pretty choice. And as a consumer or as an eater, I'm genuinely going to take a pretty picture over a little symbol 100 times, particularly if what I think is going to happen, which is that we're going to have the ability in real time to talk about the nutritional value and the residues in our food. So what I reckon it is, and I'm, talked about not predicting anything, but here we go. We're going to have an app on our phone, and we're going to be able to scan an apple, and we're going to be able to tell what the nutrient density of that apple are, what the bricks are, be able to read a whole lot of other measurements, be able to measure residue. And if you have a regenerative and an organic apple side by side, and the regenerative apple has a better outcome in terms of health outcomes for you personally, which, by the way, we're going to know because we're going to have mapped our biome and we will have a individual health plan, then I'm going to take the regenerative apple every time. Do you know what I mean? Because that regenerative apple suits my outcomes. So if we get focused on this input-based system, we're going to miss the point moving forwards. It has to be, I think, an output-based system. So you have to focus on creating the most nutrient-dense food you can within whichever system suits you, whether that's a certified system, certified organic or certified organic regenerative, or not. That's my theory.
And without the chemical residues.
No chemical residues. And the arable industry has to understand what that means. And when you say spray-free, that doesn't just mean the fact that you don't use Roundup to desiccate your crop. That also means spray-free pre-emergent. Yeah, be careful about that term.
But we will get into some more questions. And one from Dave Mitchell, which came through before. We already have options on spray-free New Zealand wheat and flour, but it isn't getting supported. They, I assume, being farmers, would do more, but. So he's, I assume Dave's articulating that there's the ability to supply there, but not necessarily seeing the demand side of things come through.
Who does he, the question that I have for him is, who is he trying to sell his wheat to? And the more, if he's part of a cooperative that's trying to sell his wheat, then that's another step removed from his final eater and his final customer. So yeah, which is legit too. But yeah, it would be a really interesting conversation to have with him around who he isn't seeing demand from. If you still answer that.
I'm sure we can. Feel free to chip in with a bit more detail there, Dave, if you'd like to. Question from Phoebe. Actually, there's a question here from James right at the start there about the impact of vertical farming. James, can you, is that like vertical farming isn't like a greenhouse, or do you mean like vertically stacked enterprises? Be good to clarify that one, and then we'll address that question. One from Phoebe. Currently, New Zealand relies on imported seed for almost all our commercial crops. Is seed sovereignty, for example, having a New Zealand-based enterprise breeding seed suited to our local and changing climates at scale, is seed sovereignty featuring in conversations about food sovereignty?
Yeah, there's only one moment in the last 4 weeks that I felt really, truly uncomfortable in terms of self-sufficiency. And that was when all my major seed suppliers stopped trading because they couldn't keep up. And so I went to them and asked the question, because we buy a fair amount of seed and we have a really good relationship with these companies. And I asked the question, look, I'm in a dilemma here. I don't want to contribute to the sort of panic buying that's obviously going on, but do you have a feel for what the situation will be come sort of July, August, which is when we normally buy our seed? And their response to me is, we don't know. So absolutely, huge part of our food security is access to our own seed and the development of seed breeding and seed saving programs within New Zealand. And interestingly, we actually produce a lot of seed as well. We're not just importers of seed, is my understanding. Someone out there, I'm sure, knows more than I do, but we also produce seed. So we obviously have the capacity to do it, particularly in some areas. But yeah, definitely conversations around seed sovereignty are really important, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, there was some when I was traveling through the US and Canada a few years ago, visiting a few farmers. That definitely was a scary reality over there in terms of as a seed producer, the rules around what was your seed and what was not were pretty loose and subject to, and even if you were comfortably but not perhaps comfortably enough on the side of the law, those big companies are put a lot of financial and legal pressure on you if they feel like it, if you start straying out of line. Thankfully I don't think we have too much of that here.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
That I've come across. So James clarified his question there. So basically, I think it's about the impact of stacking farming enterprises, and how as farmers should we be viewing that? Like, is that this kind of integrated, multi-layered operation? Putting laying hens on a dairy farm, for example, is a classic easy case that we probably all know.
Yeah.
How big a future does that potentially might that play for Kiwi farmers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've been working really hard and lobbying hard for is mobile or micro abattoirs. I just think that unlocks an incredible amount in our food system to give farmers the ability to process their own animals on farm and to have that provenance, because that on-farm product can be put out in a whole lot of different places, including it can be used on farm as an experience, it can be sent to your local community, or you can build a brand that sits behind that. Whereas at the moment, if you put animals through processes, you lose the provenance. And even some of those most famous brands that we know from New Zealand, when you try to trace it back to the farm, there's no provenance, there's no transparency of that chain or that line. So I think there's huge opportunity. We have just seen the very first license issued to a mobile abattoir up in the North Island, and just before we went into COVID-19, he was due to be audited. I haven't heard what the outcome is, but that makes me incredibly hopeful that that could manifest, and that would open up things for pork producers, chicken, a whole spectrum of protein. And also, yes, I think if you're going to vertically stack businesses on your farm, the trick is to use that term diversity again. So for example, if you had 2,000 head of lamb, you wouldn't put 2,000 head of lamb into a new business on the farm. You would trial that line with a smaller number of animals and keep a smaller number of animals, keep the egg in the basket for as long as you could while you tested the market and saw what the opportunity is, rather than jumping whole scale into a new market. So just, splitting those 2,000 head up into 3 or 4 different markets, but at the same time, taking every opportunity to build the brand of your farm. So it's a good moment really to talk about that. Maybe, Sam, we've talked about that a lot, the fact that farmers sometimes feel got at, and the role that media can play in that situation. And I really feel the need to say that farmers are incredibly considered and understood as the suppliers of our food, much more than you think you are, and that your importance is much more than people realize your importance, much more than you think they do. So while your story might seem ordinary to you, it's actually extraordinary to everybody that finally ends up eating your food, and that you have the opportunity now to truly step in to being the heroes of what comes next, if you have the self-confidence and the self-belief to do that. So your story, as much as you might think it's the same as your neighbours or the guy down the road, is actually incredibly unique. And if you can be brave enough to find a way to tell it, then the world's your oyster. And it really doesn't matter what or how you sell it, your brand will be so strong that you will find your customers one way or another anyway. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Awesome. There's a couple of related questions from Morris and Nikki around one around how consumers would find local producers, like so how can you be found by consumers, as well as vice versa, and a related question around effectively the supply chain delivery, direct delivery to consumers, is it courier companies and things like that. I don't know if we're going to get drones flying in, maybe little takeaway boxes, but probably not your 10-kilo veggie box. Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a massive shift to direct to consumer over the last 4 weeks. Absolutely huge, particularly in vegetable boxes and particularly in that peri-urban space. So consumers are actually breaking down what ends up on their plate and going after it. The problem is that there's a massive proliferation of platforms that will promise you everything in terms of you get on our platform and we'll sell stuff for you. But because there's a proliferation, it's really, again, lava landscape in terms of knowing that. And most of those platforms are just transactionary anyway. They're not actually connected at the other end to anything that's really big and significant. So I think the opportunity is to build a connected platform that's more of a storytelling platform that then connects you to your final customers. And I think that's going to be really important. There's, emerging trends in micro exporting. So even being able to bundle goods as a region and being able to send those overseas and to find your final customer. So yeah, that direct to consumer or direct to eater space is huge and growing really fast from what I can see. So you just have to do some really good brand and communication work and come up with a plan around that and make sure that it reflects who you are and what you want your story to be. And I think that's probably the starting point. And that's not my area of expertise, but I know some really cool people for whom it is. They're really good at that stuff. So just seeing that as part of your business plan as your farm, I think, is a really good investment at the moment.
I was just about to read off your number to the group because that sounded like another one where you were throwing yourself in the deep end there.
No, I mean, Eat New Zealand is actually, we've been given some funding to do a feasibility study around this big national storytelling platform. And we've also been supported to really work on our regional food stories. So that is definitely an area that Eat New Zealand sits in. And we will definitely come back to groups like Quorum Sense and say, right, we're ready. We think this is what this opportunity is, but we won't do that till it's connected at the other end in a meaningful way for producers, so that when they step onto that platform, if they choose to, that there's really big, significant outcomes from stepping onto the platform. So I'm not promising anything yet.
Looks like people have found the upvote button, and Gwen's got one that's come right to the top, but it's really long. So while I read it, I'm gonna chip in with one.
We talked about being the heroes. We talked a little bit about, you read the question and I'll talk to this. So because we're about to step into the space of food insecurity, really massive food insecurity, there really is an opportunity for farmers to think about what that means in terms of their business. I know just about every farmer I've ever met does not want to see their community go hungry, and now's the time to really think about what that might mean in terms of your business and how you can contribute to that. I think that's going to be a really important part of what comes next. And I'm really hopeful that while we would have seen that, people like chefs and restaurateurs are really the ones that have had the profile previously, for me, this looks like a significant paradigm shift. And I'm really hopeful that our long-term heroes will be our farmers and our catchers. So yeah, this looks good, I think, but now's the time to be a hero. Yep.
Awesome. All right, I've got through Gwen's question. So essentially, she's talking about New Zealand's capacity to kind of have our own supply and distribution chain for across our food. So, and the question is really, do we actually have the ability to be self-sufficient from an infrastructure perspective? She's referring to like packaging, for example, or seeds. Like, what are the things that are currently missing from our national food system infrastructure, perhaps? And has anyone mapped it? Would a map be useful so that we can, so that farmers can understand those kind of key pieces of infrastructure that need to be in place, perhaps, or others?
Yeah, I do think a map would be really interesting, and Gwen, Bristol has done something like that, so that's worth looking at. So it's basically a map of where their food comes from, and there are other countries around the world that are working on national food strategies, which is definitely something that Eat New Zealand's pitching government and agencies and agribusiness for, is a national food strategy that sits around all of this. So I think that would be a piece of work that would come out of that, is a mapping of where our weaknesses are and how we can build them up. We're definitely seeing this internationally, this circularity, or what's the other term, where you create a circular economy around food, and this relocalization of our food systems overseas. The interesting thing about that is that's a conversation that's really difficult for New Zealand to have publicly, because we are a trading nation. And so when we start to have those conversations publicly, New Zealand thinks it sends a signal to the rest of the world that says, oh, you should also not do that. Do you know what I mean? You should also not import anything. So we have this tension in that we want to be a fully closed loop system, but if all of our trading partners also want to be fully closed loop systems, where do we export our food from? Where do we export our food to? So it's semantics, and it comes down to strategy and approach and language in order to make sure that we can secure some food security for us, but always understanding that there has to be room for us as a trading nation as well. And of course, that comes into trade agreements and international trading rules and laws, and that gets really complicated, which is why there's still no country of origin on milk in New Zealand, or milk products or dairy products in New Zealand, which you think there would be, but for that very reason. Yeah.
One here from Will, totally agree with having regenerative products promoted, but do you think there should be a premium price put on it, or should it be one for one? If we want to produce it, if we want our produce to go to everyone, then it needs to be affordable, ?
Whoa, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's always very hard to talk about affordable food without the bigger context of the system that sits around that. And there's a big difference between cheap food and providing value. So we really don't want to get into that cheap food conversation, because then there's a whole lot of externalities that sit around that, including our environment and the value of our labor and all of that kind of stuff. So we want to provide food that has value and that delivers to a whole lot of different aspects beyond just economic aspects, including our environment and social and cultural outcomes as well. So I think that there should be a premium for food that is produced in a way that supports its environment. But perhaps that doesn't look like more expensive food. Perhaps that looks like something like farmers paid for environmental services, which I know there's a whole lot of farmers out there that have just gone, whoa, is she talking about a subsidy? But yeah, it's a carrot that says, if I'm going to farm in this way, that I'm going to be supported to farm in this way. So, and I know that there's lots of farmers that do that anyway and don't need the carrot. But perhaps that's a way of getting stuff through the system and not having it be more expensive out the other end, maybe. I'm so up for other people spitballing that stuff.
Yeah, that brings up when that kind of concept clicked for me, again, I was actually in the States, and I visited this 20-year organic biodynamic, I think he was as well, market gardener, 10 hectares, I think it was like 50 years corn on corn, under a conventional full tillage and fertilizer system for years. And he'd sectioned off this one little corner, annoying part of the land, and just fenced it off and just sort of let it go. And 20 years later, there was like 2 stunted 2-meter high trees and still probably 60% bare soil where he just fenced it off and left it, and the rest of it he had turned into, basically through having half in annual cover crops that he grazed and half in the other half in veggie production each year, still with quite a lot of tillage. But the soil building was just phenomenal, and his inputs were basically seed and animals. That was it, and he was selling direct from his front gate only on a Saturday morning, so he was only selling for half a day a week. And the price of that food, and he wasn't making any money, you could tell by his lifestyle, like he was earning a living but not much more, and the price of that food was still out of reach of so many people, for him to do it in that manner. Like, and I just couldn't see any more efficiencies to be gained without having some kind of detriment in another form. And that was really where it clicked to me. It's like, actually, that's a broader social problem around social, kind of an economic problem rather than a problem with the produce. And
often they get carved off from each other, and it's like, you're just producing food for people who can afford it. But and that's why I think one of the really important levers to pull has been things like an increase in minimum wage, so that the people who are likely to buy your food are likely to have more money than they would 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or perhaps it looks like a basic income for everyone. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are other levers to pull rather than creating efficiencies that just create cheaper food. And you can't take that food producing system out of its bigger economic system. That's unfair.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Right, I think we might go with 2 more questions before we. We've had a few more come in. Carol, I've been saving yours till last, so we'll chip in with Hamish's there. We buy Nigel's Pioneer flour from the farmer's mill, which is actually better value than the supermarket stuff we usually buy. However, the minimum order is 400 kilos. Should farmer's mill lower this threshold, or should the customers change and team up with locals for the order? We feel this is restricting growth for this wonderful product.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that was the limitation that I alluded to earlier about farmer's mill not being able, there are really good bakers around the country that would like to use that product but can't because of the minimum order. And absolutely, I think they should reduce that, but I don't understand enough about their business as to why that can't happen. So there will be something in there that means that they don't have the capacity to do that. I'm sure they've considered it. Yes, they do. That's the easy answer to that.
Cool. Okay, one more question that I really like that's come in before we go to Carl's to finish up. When you've got an idea or a product you've taken to market, how the hell do you fund it / scale it while still staying true to the story that you got there, or maybe of how you got there? Do you let it grow organically from profit, or do you look for investment?
Oh, that was such a case-by-case scenario, right? That just depends. Everything to do with what you want the outcome for your businesses, what your vision is, what your purpose is, all of that kind of stuff. I think scalability is a very tricky thing to answer in generic terms. I think it's important not to want to scale just for the purpose of scaling. There has to be a point at which it still delivers outcomes beyond the economic ones. Again, does scaling mean that you still get to do what you really love to do, what you really want to do, or are you scaling because you think you should? Yes. So, and again, it depends on your individual economic position as to whether or not you seek investment or you look at funding it yourself. Given that we've said that we're entering a time of incredible volatility, I would be really cautious around making really big investments in a single thing, knowing that there's going to be a whole lot of unseen things coming forward. So my gut feeling would be that you grow things organically and you find where the opportunities are and how the opportunities might change and when you need to pivot would be my gut feeling, but it depends on the case by case basis.
Good. I'd say from my own personal experience of being involved in a direct market from a farm position is that it is phenomenal how much it can consume, how much time and energy it can consume in that startup phase, and especially when you don't have a history in it and the skills, and even things like sending out newsletters and setting up distribution and supply chains and packaging solutions and all those kind of things just seem to, I was just amazed at how much time and energy it sucked and how much it can take away from other businesses if you don't do it, if you don't take the slow and steady route.
Yeah, and maybe maybe one of the solutions to that is a small cooperative of farms, knowing that there is within that cooperative there's someone that does have those skills, or someone for whom that can be their job. Do you know what I mean? And I understand that cooperatives can scale and become unwieldy, and there are all sorts of issues, but maybe the answer to some of those problems is by creating small community-based cooperatives that have the same outcome and vision, and that there's someone within that group that has the skills and is assigned the task of doing that.
Cool. Righto, last question. Do you think the government/MPI is really ready to fund regenerative ag, or is it safer to rebrand pitches for funding under different names like innovation?
Oh my God, that's like, no wonder you left that to the end. That is the $1 million question. I think they're ready. I think they know. Whether or not there are challenges along the way from organisations that perhaps don't believe, that's the big unknown. But everything I've seen would suggest that they are looking for transformational ideas, and that's definitely the same that that's what the science world purports to want, is not, it's not the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but the fence at the top. They're looking for transformational ideas, and regenerative definitely stands in that place. I don't know, you can probably answer that as much as I can, Sam. My feeling is that we're allowed to use the term regenerative now. What do you reckon?
Oh, it depends who you're talking to, and depends whether you've got an opportunity to explain what you mean by it. But I'd say the Gwen Grellett from Lanky Research and I have been doing a lot of work, mostly science related, around the sort of regenerative systems and that. And we've just got a piece of work funded by our Land and Water National Science Challenge and the Next Foundation to kind of build a regenerative outcomes framework, just going broad, not confining it, just to help kind of move that conversation along and help that sort of evidencing piece that lots of people seem concerned about. But I think, that interest is definitely increasing in the conversations, and there's quite a few people in MPI as an example that are very pro, very kind of very curious, and there's a couple of advocates in there as well, increasingly so even at high level. I know the Ministry of Environment's starting to look into it as well.
We came up with the term, didn't we? It was called Regen Curious.
Regen.
Yeah.
Perfect t-shirt material.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the other? Don't underestimate the impact of like you say, a good story. Peter Barrett's Country Calendar episode last Sunday. For those that haven't seen it, it's worth a watch. Like that, just completely. It's amazing how much impact that one story generated. And there's some specific reasons for that, but it's also just a beautifully told.
Pretty pictures. Told you.
And he didn't look like a hippie. But that shook a lot of people in those big institutions and ministries and things like that. And Quorum Sense is hoping that we're going to have some kind of partnership with them to do more of what we do best in future. But we'll see how that goes. But I think the importance of some people, that storytelling needs a whole lot of different components to it. Some people, that the story and the why and the more emotive stuff is really what sells it. For other people, it's the technical details around production and productivity, and others it's the finances, and some it's a bit of everything. So I suppose we're seeing changes. I personally would like we're hoping to do a few more case studies this year that kind of helped bring that whole story and picture together, just so that instead of one or two examples nationally, like people can kind of engage in a whole lot of different examples of what this looks like around the country, because what you do at Peter Barrett's place is completely different to what you do at Hamish Bielski's down in South Otago, and that's quite an important aspect to it. And there's no, everyone's looking for a linear equation to describe this thing, so
and look, that's what I've learned about the regenerative family, is that there's amazing stories that sit in your midst, and I've been blown away by the nature of the people that I've met in the space, and the ability for you to connect your land with who you are and what you create as a result of that. So again, have faith in your stories and understand that you sit at the very edge of that eater or consumer facing space, if you're brave enough to step into it, that there's a huge appetite for what it is that you're doing and the way that you're going about it. So don't be afraid. And that was definitely, I understand a little bit about country calendar and the kind of statistics that sit behind that, and that is quite huge.
Angela, for those that don't know, Angela also has a country calendar episode focusing on herself and her family there, which aired a few months ago, so feel free to check that out. And I think we're going to wrap it up there. Hamish threw in another question. Hamish, you could throw that one onto the Facebook group if you want, and tag Angela in it, and I'm sure she'll answer it before she goes to bed. And on which
wine, brave enough to have wine.
Yeah, I think you've earned it. How can people contact you, reach you if they'd like to talk more about this? What's the best way?
They can email me, Angela at eatnewzealand.nz, and they can come and find me. The Food Farm is a Facebook page, really active on Instagram, which is at the Food Farm NZ. So just message me there as well. Otherwise, just contact Sam, and I'm sure he'll give you my details.
Perfect. Brilliant. Hey, well, thanks so much. It's been quite fun, and thanks everyone for all the questions. And that's, these questions kind of make it a bit more real, rather than Ange and I just bantering away at each other for an hour.
You sure? Yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. And if you'd like to keep those conversations going on the Facebook page or the WhatsApp for those of you that are on there, or on Ange's Instagram feed, get amongst it. And really looking forward to seeing some of the produce from this growing group making its way into the likes of Heathcote Valley, where I'm currently living, Andy Bunny, not in Hawke's Bay anymore. And there's certainly plenty of keen 25 to 40-year-old woke, nutrition-oriented friends of my partner Sylvia's here that are quite keen on getting their hands on. Certainly the milk and the meat's been a big one. I think we had the Roan dairy guys on here this evening, and we drink about 6 litres of that a week, and it's outstanding. So keep it up. And
and that's a message for you, Roan, if you're still watching. We talked about the fact that Sam would really like to meet you and know more about your farm and who you are, and it's a really good example of taking it to the next step. So done a magnificent job of doing something really unique in the dairy market space. And I think Clearwater was on here as well. Same genius, brilliant commitment to organics and the way that you produce what you produce. So what are the opportunities to find those people that are buying your food and bring them in and make them part of your family, and connect them to you so that they never lose loyalty? And whatever the world throws at us, from pandemics to climate change to whatever, that they will hold you steady and they will be the foundation for your business moving forward. So I think that's really the big opportunity.
Brilliant. All right. Well, on that note, have a good evening, everybody, and enjoy waking up to level 3 tomorrow. Woohoo!
Woo! No KFC.